Hi, I'm Laurie and I'd like to share with you today a couple of tools that I like to use for pressing and for binding. So stay with me for the next little bit and we'll go through some really awesome tools. So now I'd like to talk to you about some pressing tools that I really like. The first one is this little mini Oliso iron. So it comes with its own silicone base. The one side is for resting your iron on. The other side, it slips into for traveling and storing. There is a little light on the front of the iron, so if you're pressing two dark fabrics and want to make sure there's no creases in there, it kind of lights up an area, highlights it. It's got an auto shut off, and it's got amazing steam. To put water into it, you just pop open the back end, pour your water in, and to make it steam, you press these two little buttons on the side. So, pressing the buttons, listen to that steam come out of there. That's almost as much steam as my regular at-home iron gives. So, the next item I'd like to talk to you about is the wool pressing mat. This one in particular is called a 2-in-1 mat. This size is 18 by 24. It's a half an inch thick, but it also separates into a 13.5 by 13.5. This mat is great for using the large size when you're at home, but if you're going to a class and you need to take your pressing station with you, you take your little mini iron, you take your inner part, your 13.5-inch piece, and off you go to class. Easy to put in a bag and doesn't take up much space on your table. Now you might say, why would I use a wool pressing mat? The wool pressing mat provides heat from both sides of your block. So you get a really good hard press on your blocks. I have some blocks here that I don't know if you can see on the camera, but they've got kind of a bubble in them. So I just pressed these at home on my regular ironing surface, no wool mat. So I'm going to take my little iron. I'm going to press the block here. And the wool mat there's heat coming from the bottom and from the top from the iron, from the bottom from the mat. So now I have a nice flat block. If I want to ensure that that's even more flat, or flatter, I guess, I'm going to press a second one here, and I am going to use a clapper, and I put that on. So now the heat is coming from the bottom from the mat, the top from the iron, and the clapper is trapping it between the two. And so the block can do nothing but lie flat. And the clappers, we have two sizes at the store. We have a 12-inch square and this small clapper by Gypsy Quilter. And now my block is super flat. Now you might be asking what these purple things are on my fingers. So these are called heat-resistant thimbles. They come a set of 3 in a package, and they're 3 different sizes. They have little grippies on them. They are good for when you need to get in tight. You're working on some really small little pieces and you need to get in close. I've got the iron right up against my finger, and it's not burning my finger because the silicone is protecting it. So they also work great for if you're doing a jelly roll rug, when you're pulling all that batting and fabric out. That gets really hot. These work great to protect your fingers. You could also get 2 sets, and they work good for when you're doing your free motion quilting. It gives you a little bit more freedom than wearing the gloves. I can, move my fingers easily. I can easily pick things up like this little tiny thread off of the mat, and I can brush off my clothes so nobody knows I've been downstairs quilting. The next item I'd like to talk to you about is binding. So, some of the binding tools I like to use. I really like this Quilted Hearts Binding Ease, it's called. It's a silicone pad that has 2 little loops, kind of like belt loops, and you fold your binding in half, run it through there, and it creases it so nicely. So I'm going to just start here, just so I have, when I poke it through the end, it's creased. So I'm going to stick it through this end, pull it here, and then you take your iron, you place it on top of the silicone mat, and you just pull your binding through. Nice and easy. You don't have to worry about getting your fingers in there close, although with your purple fingers, it's not so bad. But you can quickly run your binding through there for a full-size quilt in only a couple of minutes. So that was regular binding. And what about 2-color binding? Does it work as easily? So let's check it out and see. I'm going to fold my binding. I'm just going to press it to get it started, same as I did the other one. Run it through the loops. And these mats, they do get hot from the iron sitting on them. And I probably shouldn't sit my iron face down there on the wool mat because it could scorch it. In fact, they say when you pack up your iron, you should let it cool on its heel. So here, let's run the 2-color binding through and see if it's just as slick. And there it goes. Because it's a silicone mat here, it does hold the fabric, so it doesn't just slip, willy-nilly through. It has some stability to it. And there, your 2-color binding. Just as easy as your single binding. Now, I like to make my binding once I've finished my quilt top because I've got all my fabrics there, and if I put them away, I might use them for something else. So once I've got my binding made, I don't want to just roll it into a ball and stick it in a bag. So I like using a tool like one of these quilt binding spools. You put it through here. It's got 2 little holes, so you loop it through there, and then you just wrap your binding around, and this will hold, I believe, a king-size binding. I can stick a little pin in here, and I can put it on my shelf, and it's ready for when my quilt comes back from Laurie's. And I don't have to search for the binding. I just go to my shelf, pull off my tool. When I'm sewing it on my machine, this just sits in my lap, and I just unroll it as I need the binding to follow around the quilt. Nice and neat, and you won't be rolling over the binding with your chair wheels, or it won't get caught under your feet somewhere. Another tool that works the same is this binding wheel. So you stick your binding through the center. There's a little hole there. And then just wind our binding up. This too can sit on your shelf until you're ready to bind your quilt. Then when you take it down, you just unroll your binding as much as you need, sew it on, and carry on. And an added bonus, both of these have sparkles in them, so add some bling to your sewing room. So those are the tools that I like for binding and for pressing. One thing I did forget to mention was when you use your wool pressing mat, you might want to put another layer underneath it. A piece of plywood with some heat-resistant fabric, which we do sell at the store here. That way it will protect your surface. If you've got a laminate countertop or tabletop, the heat from the wool mat will eventually warp that. So this will protect that from happening. So in conclusion, I hope that you try out some of these tools. They will help you with your pressing and your binding. And I don't know if you noticed my curved piecing blocks that I used to demonstrate the clapper and the wool mat. But if you know me at all, you know that I love curved piecing and I love the So Kind of Wonderful patterns. So watch a future brochure. They come out twice a year and there may be a class in there. And I'd love you to join me.